Hey guys, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. The topic of today's video is the CIA. Now, the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, is an important topic to study and to discuss because it is, in fact, one of the most powerful organizations in the world. The CIA is known and has a reputation for being America's intelligence gathering agency. And while this is true, underneath the initial surface of this fact is the truth that the CIA is, in fact, much more than just a spy agency. The truth is that the CIA is an instrument of the Luciferian world elites that are working to build a new world order. The CIA is in the United States. It is an instrument of the deep state and it has in fact been called the deep state itself. When one studies the history of the CIA, it reveals a dark web of connections to assassinations, international drug lanes, mind control programs, the removal and overthrowing of governments across the world, and ultimately it reveals an agency that has claimed to be in service to the American people, but has really in fact betrayed the very people it is supposed to serve. This video will cover some of that history today. Now, as I said before, the CIA is known as America's intelligence gathering agency. And while espionage is part of what the CIA does, the much more prominent role that the CIA fills is the carrying out of covert operations, commonly known as Black Ops. Black Ops include a number of different programs and operations, including military warfare, assassinations, false flags, coups d'etats, the rigging of elections, and all forms of discretionary clandestine military missions. Now, the CIA, due to its use of Black Ops, makes it a powerful agency that enforces the political and military will of the United States across the world. Now, what's scary about this reality is the fact that the CIA is not accountable to, quote, we the people, or the people of the United States, but is in fact an instrument that is controlled by the elites in Washington. In theory, the CIA is supposed to be under the supervision of Congress and what is called congressional oversight, but history has proven time and again that congressional oversight is in fact a joke and a farce. In actuality, the CIA is an integral organ of the deep state, working to push the globalist world agenda for a new world order. Of the shadow government in Washington, the leadership of the CIA has been connected to secret societies, and in fact, two shadowy groups more than any other have been closely connected to the leadership of the CIA. These two secret societies are the Knights of Malta and Skull and Bones. When one studies the history of the CIA, they see that a disproportionate number of CIA directors of Central Intelligence have been both Knights of Malta and Skull and Bones. The Knights of Malta are an order of knights that have existed for 1,000 years, going back to 1048 AD. The Knights of Malta were founded as the Knights Hospitaller in the Holy Land during the Crusades. The Knights Hospitaller were one of the famous monastic knightly orders that fought in the Crusades alongside other famous orders such as the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights. After the Crusaders were pushed out of the Holy Land when they were defeated by the Muslims, the Knights fled to Cyprus. As the centuries passed, the Knights Hospitaller earned a fearsome reputation fighting the Muslims in the Mediterranean Sea, in places such as Rhodes and eventually Malta. They eventually became known as the Knights of Malta due to the fact that Malta was gifted to them as the island that became their base of operations. The Knights of Malta have been known to be elite warriors fighting for the Holy See or for the papacy, and they are loyal completely to the Pope of Rome. In modern times, the Knights of Malta claim to be merely a philanthropic order doing various works of charity across the world, but in fact it is still a political and above all a military organization. The Knights of Malta today are recognized under international law as a sovereign entity And in recognition of this fact, the Knights of Malta even have observer status at the United Nations as part of their sovereign recognition. The Grand Master of the Order of the Knights of Malta is recognized both as a sovereign prince and is also granted the rank of a cardinal in the Catholic Church, showing his importance and power within both the Catholic Church and the world at large. Knights of Malta are not fringe Catholics, but are dedicated to their church and swear an oath of complete obedience to the Pope and pledge to serve the interests of the Catholic Church in all areas of life where they may serve. Now, the founders of the C.I.A., the fathers of the C.I.A. as they were, including William, quote, Wild Bill Donovan, Allen Dulles, and James Jesus Angleton, were all Knights of Malta, as well as famous directors of Central Intelligence such as William Colby, John McCone, and William Casey, the director under President Ronald Reagan. These men have all been dedicated Knights of Malta who have led the agency of the C.I.A., where their ultimate allegiance has ultimately been to the Pope of Rome. Now, the other sinister secret society connected to the C.I.A. is Skull and Bones, famous for its connections to the campus of Yale University. Now, Skull and Bones is a secret society that has been, ever since the 19th century in America, has been committed to acquiring and exercising political power both in the United States and across the world. Skull and Bones was founded in 1832 by the 33rd degree Freemason William Huntington Russell, and also by Alphonso Taft, the father of the future President Taft. Skull and Bones is an important secret society producing three presidents, President William Taft and George Herbert Walker Bush and George W. Bush, and has produced heads of American intelligence, captain of industry, U.S. senators, congressmen, other politicians, and numerous other influential figures in America and the world at large. Now, Skull and Bones as a secret society is known for the fact that it recruits its members from Yale University. 15 juniors at the end of junior year are selected by the leaving senior class of Skull and Bones, and they are tapped on what is called Tap Night. And then those juniors, the next year, for the full senior year, the last year they spend on campus, they are initiated into this secret society where they go to the famous Yale clubhouse, which looks, in fact, like a giant tomb. And in this tomb, or in this clubhouse, the initiates into Skull and Bones are initiated into the occult and practice occult rituals. And some of these rituals have been caught by amateur eavesdroppers, the overly curious, who have been able to catch glimpses of what goes on in the courtyard of the Skull and Bones clubhouse, or have been able to catch certain aspects of it on video. Researchers have gone to great lengths, even at the peril of their own lives, to expose the rituals of Skull and Bones. And these occult rituals have been shown to include things such as mock human sacrifice, worshiping the skull, and confessions of things of a personal nature within the tomb of the clubhouse to other initiates into the order. While these initiates are on the Yale campus, they are known as knights, but after graduation, they are moved into positions of power in society at large, and for the rest of their lives, they are known as patriarchs. Skull and Bones is much more of a postgraduate society than merely a college fraternity. And Skull and Bones members, once they are pushed into prominent positions of power, they do everything within their power to be able to advance the interests of the order in whatever place they find themselves in society. And this is the ultimate goal of Skull and Bones, is the acquiring of power. And as a part of this, 2 CIA directors have been Bonesmen. Richard Helms, the director of the CIA under the Nixon administration during the very infamous scandal of Watergate, and George Herbert Walker Bush, who went on to be President of the United States after his tenure as CIA director. And other members of the CIA have been also members of Skull and Bones, men such as William F. Buckley and other famous CIA spooks. Now, these connections to the Knights of Malta and Skull and Bones prove that there is much more to the CIA than meets the eye, much more than what we would have you to be believed by the propaganda of the United States political establishment. A closer examination of the history of the CIA proves this to be the truth beyond what we could ever speculate or imagine. The CIA was founded in 1947, but its origins really go back to the start of World War II under its predecessor organization known as the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS. Now, the OSS served as America's intelligence apparatus during the Second World War, and the OSS were led by men who were all loyal sons of the Catholic Church and served the Pope within the Vatican. The father of American intelligence and the leader of the OSS during the Second World War was William Donovan, known by his nickname Wild Bill Donovan. Now, Donovan was the head of the OSS during the war, and as was said before, was a loyal Knight of Malta, who, unbeknownst to many, was in fact serving two masters. In addition to working for the government in Washington, Donovan was also working for the Pope, and his loyal service in the intelligence community as a Knight of Malta, his loyal service to the Vatican, eventually led him to be awarded the Medal of St. Sylvester, which was only given to individuals who have served the Pope in unique and extraordinary ways beyond what is considered the normal bounds of duty. And another Knight of Malta who was a key leader within the OSS during World War II was James Jesus Angleton, who worked the Vatican desk for the OSS during the war. And in this role, he worked closely with Giovanni Montini, who in later years would go on to be Pope Paul VI. Now, the OSS cooperated closely with the Vatican in the latter part of the Second World War, and the OSS's cooperation with the Vatican was part of a greater alliance that emerged between the American government and the Vatican in 1943, when the war was tipping in the Allies' favor. Pope Pius XII had infamously supported the rise of fascism in Italy and the rise of Nazism in Germany, and he had been instrumental in signing a concordat or diplomatic agreement with Hitler, and he had supported the fascist movement in Europe because he believed that it was beneficial for advancing the interests of the Catholic Church. But when the war began to tip in the Allies' favor, Pope Pius XII and the Vatican in Rome opened up diplomatic channels with the American government, and a new alliance emerged that would continue on into the post-war world of the Cold War. And the American government and the Vatican worked closely together throughout the rest of the World War II. And as the war came to a close, the OSS worked closely with the Vatican to smuggle key Nazi war criminals out of Europe who were thought that they would be useful in the emerging Cold War. So therefore they were protected from the avenues of justice, and they were smuggled out of Europe in the infamous Vatican rat lines. And many of these infamous war criminals who had served in the Nazi military or in Nazi intelligence apparatus, men such as Reinhard Gehlen or Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, escaped justice in Europe, traveled through the Vatican rat lines, the smuggling networks that were set up for the escape of Nazis, and they eventually found themselves working for the OSS, which became the CIA. And as the Cold War began after the close of World War II, the CIA was established, and in 1951, Allen Dulles, another Knight of Malta, became its director. Now, the CIA in the Cold War era would launch coups d'etats in the overthrow of governments and assassinations, all to advance the interests of the elites in the West, in a part of their geopolitical aims or goals. In 1953, the CIA launched a coup in Iran after the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the Iranian oil fields that were owned by the company British Petroleum. Now, this move by the Iranians angered the Western elites, which led to the CIA overthrowing the Iranian government in a coup and putting the Shah of Iran, an American puppet, in power. The Shah of Iran was a brutal dictator who ruled Iran through fear and through the use of his secret police until the year 1979, when he was thrown out of power by the Iranian people in the Iranian Revolution. And this move by the Americans to overthrow the government in Iran and to put the Shah in power and to support the Shah in power, even when he was hated by many of its own people, has greatly fueled the hatred of Americans by Iranians even to this very day. The following year, in 1954, the CIA launched another coup in Guatemala. The socialist president Jacobo Arbenz nationalized the interests in Guatemala of the United Fruit Company. Now, Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, and his brother John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration. Now, these men were major shareholders in the United Fruit Company and had interest in seeing those interests protected. Now, the CIA worked to overthrow the Guatemalan government and to put in place a pro-American government that would protect American interests in the region. A key CIA agent who worked to bring about this coup was the famous man Howard Hunt, who later became connected to the plumbers under the Nixon administration and the scandal of Watergate. Howard Hunt worked closely with the Cardinal Francis Spellman, the Archbishop of New York, who was a close personal friend of Pope Pius XII and was the go-between between the American government and the Vatican in the early Cold War alliance. And Howard Hunt, who worked on the Guatemalan coup, would go on to work on other famous CIA operations and eventually finding his connections to the Watergate scandal. He, in fact, at one point said that the one institution that had a greater intelligence apparatus than the Americans was the Vatican itself, saying particularly of the Jesuits that they had the, quote, the greatest intelligence service in the world, end quote. Now, the CIA continued their black operations across the world throughout the Cold War. In 1961, the CIA trained an army of anti-communist Cuban nationals and had them launch an invasion of Cuba in what became known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. The invasion failed due to the fact that there was inadequate naval and air support of the Cuban fighters, and they were pushed back into the sea, to the fury of President Kennedy, who claimed that the CIA had lied to him about key details of the invasion. Kennedy was so infuriated that he responded by firing Allen Dulles as the director of Central Intelligence, and he went on to threaten to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Kennedy, during his years in office, learned the hard truth that the CIA was not working for the interests of the American government, but they were an institution independent of themselves and working for their own aims and goals. That they were in fact part of what we now understand to be, quote, the deep state. Now, Kennedy fought against this institution of the deep state, and his opposition to the CIA and the deep state in Washington eventually led to his assassination in 1963 in Dallas at Dealey Plaza. Now, the Warren Commission, of course, claimed that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone by firing 3 shots at the president, the third shot claiming to have killed him, in what became known as, quote, the magic bullet theory. But we know that this was all a lie, and instead that the president was killed by multiple shooters as part of a conspiracy that was led by the CIA. And the truth eventually came out due to the brave work of a district attorney in New Orleans by the name of Jim Garrison, who through the work of investigating the assassination discovered the truth and found that Lee Harvey Oswald was in fact just a patsy, and that there was a number of conspirators that had been connected to both Oswald and to the Central Intelligence Agency. And he worked to expose this truth. And he even brought one of the conspirators, a man by the name of Clay Shaw, to trial. Clay Shaw, alongside other men such as David Ferry and Guy Bannister, were all connected to the CIA. And even though Garrison worked to expose the truth, it has been largely covered up, even though over 70% of Americans believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone in killing President Kennedy. And Lee Harvey Oswald, before he was given a chance to speak the truth himself, he was killed by Jack Ruby in Dallas not long after the assassination. But even after the time of the Kennedy administration, the CIA black ops continued around the world for decades, leading right up to our own day. In the 1980s, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, the CIA worked to arm the Mujahideen fighters that were fighting the Soviets. And over a long 10-year war, the CIA funded and armed a covert war that fought against the communists in Asia, and particularly in Afghanistan. And the Mujahideen fighters that had been armed by the CIA later morphed into what we now know to be the Taliban. And after the Iranian Revolution and an anti-American government was installed in Iran, Iraq and Iran began engaged in a long war known as the Iran-Iraq War, and the CIA backed and armed Saddam Hussein in his efforts to fight against the Iranians. Another great example of how the CIA's efforts to install chaos across the world often leads to the detriment of the American people and create that today's allies become tomorrow's enemies, seen in both the Taliban and Saddam Hussein. The CIA armed the paramilitary group known as the Contras in Nicaragua under the Reagan administration, who worked to overthrow the communist Sandinista government. And this was a long covert war that was fought there due to the work of the CIA working with the Contras. Now, it needs to be understood at this point that just because the exposure of CIA black ops across the world does not in any way need to promote false agendas such as leftism or communism, these are evil forces. But this also proves that just because the CIA was opposed to the communists during the Cold War does not mean that it is a benign, enlightened institution in its own right. Now, of course, many Americans in both the intelligence services and in the military and the American government have been true patriots who have loved America and have tried to stand up for what's right. But many of these true patriots have found themselves working in a system that is working against the very ideals that they love, and the CIA is no exception to this. And the CIA black ops that have gone on around the world have continued right up to our own day. We can even think of the American involvement in the Middle East, the war on terror, the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the CIA operations in the Middle East, including involvement with the Arab Spring revolutions, and many other things could be said. And all of the CIA black ops that have been gone on around the world have been funded by the international drug lanes, which have been controlled by a collaboration of the CIA and organized crime working together. And this goes right back to the end of World War II and the beginning of the post-war era. The famous French Connection, the drugs that were smuggled into the United States from places such as Southeast Asia, where we later fought the war in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, where these drugs would be smuggled into Europe and then later across the Atlantic into the United States. And another key place where drugs have been known to originate from has been Afghanistan, another place of American involvement in the world. The CIA black budget has been kept secret from the congressional oversight that is supposed to overlook it. And in fact, that these operations are but the tip of the spear of what the CIA has truly done since its inception. Now, the most extreme CIA covert programs that have taken place are almost too outlandish to believe. They have even experimented with bizarre and sinister programs such as MK Ultra, where they experimented with various forms of mind control, even using the use of powerful drugs such as LSD, where they gave these drugs to test subjects to experiment their effects. In the 1970s, MK Ultra was exposed, and it was claimed to be that the program was disbanded. But in actuality, it has continued on right up until our own day under the MK Ultra Monarch program. Monarch being another secretive program of mind control that merged with the earlier MK Ultra variant of mind control testing. And all of these things prove that the CIA is once again not what it appears to be, and that all of these things that have been stated is but the tip of the spear. Now, it is important for those of us who call ourselves truthers to understand that the CIA is an instrument of the elites that are working to serve not the American people, but are another instrument to build the New World Order. And this is why we must have discernment of what is going on with the Central Intelligence Agency. So as I always say, guys, this is a really important topic. It's something that is worth looking into and studying, to have at least a working knowledge of the history of the CIA. And it really shows that even though America was a land that has historically been filled with many Christians, and that it has been a great beacon of liberty and freedom in many respects, it also is a nation that has a dark history in its own right as well, and that we need to have a balanced perspective on these things. And this is just a great reminder that we are in the midst of a spiritual war that is going on every day. And even though the majority of the American people and even the majority of professing Christians choose to ignore it, we are in desperate need of people who are going to seek out the truth and are going to stand upon the truth and are not going to be afraid to serve Christ and to participate in the spiritual war in the way that our Lord and King would have us to participate. So once again, guys, I encourage you to just look into the CIA, study it, get an understanding of it, and the Lord is going to use that to grant you greater discernment of what is going on in our world. That being said, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truth and Ministries. God bless.